This episode of Tales from Aztlantis is brought to you by Aztlantis Premium. Don't you just hate having your favorite podcast interrupted by ads like this? Well, dear listener, you're in luck. Because starting at just $3 a month, you can support independent Chicano media and receive ad-free episodes, premium episodes, bonus content, and access to our Discord server. Just visit talesfromaztlantis.com and click Go Premium, or follow the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show. Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to yet another dispatch from Aztlantis. I am your host for today, Kurly Tlapoyawa. So we usually do these dispatches every other Thursday, but due to unforeseen circumstances, I was not able to get this one out yesterday. So apologies for my lateness, but I hope you appreciate today's short episode on what I have been up to. So recently, I had the privilege of giving a lecture or presentation at Skepticamp New Mexico, which took place on June 1st and 2nd here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It featured a wide variety of talks and presentations. There was a documentary film shown, and I got to meet a lot of really cool people and listen to some really excellent presentations. The topics covered, stuff like Bigfoot and UFOs and medical quackery and ghosts and, just stuff like that. Amongst the guests with me, if I could go through this list real quick, was Adrian Hill, our Ben Radford, our good friend Ben Radford, who's been a guest on the show before. He gave a great talk. Celestia Ward, our very own Larry Barker. If you're from Albuquerque, New Mexico, you know who Larry Barker is. Dave Thomas from New Mexicans for Science and Reason was there. And who am I missing? Brian Dunning of the Skeptoid podcast gave a short talk and then showed us his newest documentary film called The UFO Movie, They Don't Want You to See, which, if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend looking it up online. I'm sure you could find it on the various streaming sources, so check it out. It was a really good talk. And the talk that I gave was called Course Correction. And it was basically how pseudo-archaeology, pseudo-science, pseudo-history, and New Age nonsense are undermining the purpose or the goals of ethnic studies in general and Chicano studies in particular. And so I went into a lot of the things that we've discussed before here on the show, right? I gave the origin of the concept of Hunab Ku, which is not a Maya concept, and the origin of the symbol that people commonly, know as Hunab Ku. I went into the whole story of where that came from and how teaching a distorted and misrepresented version of Maya philosophy is not only wrong, but it's undermining, it's damaging the goals of Chicano studies, because I think our history, our culture is worthy enough to be taught as it is, that it stands on its own 2 feet, that it is a valid topic that should be taught in universities, and it does not need to be propped up with pseudo-historical and pseudo-archaeological nonsense. And so, I gave that part of the talk, and then I finished it up by talking about the whole Black Olmec myth, right? And this is something that we had discussed way back on episode 6 of this podcast. If you haven't listened to it yet, I highly recommend that you go back and check it out, because in that episode, we discussed this paper that had been published called Early Pioneers of the Americas, the Role of the Olmecs in Urban Education and Social Studies Curriculum. This paper was put out in 2020 into an academic journal called the Urban Review. And so I talked about this in my presentation and how this paper that had been published in an academic journal was really pushing the idea that the Olmecs were Black Africans. And in fact, the paper started from the premise that, yes, the Olmecs are Black Africans. And how do we teach this properly in the public school system, in social studies curriculum? So they started off with a false premise, right? They started off with pseudo-historical nonsense. And so my co-host and I, Dr. Ruben Arellano Tlacatecat, we wrote a letter, an open letter to the Urban Review. And if you want to check it out, it's there on episode 6. And, we basically went point by point and addressed the issues with this paper to the Urban Review. And to our surprise, the Urban Review retracted the paper. And, this made us really excited. So it felt like a victory for us. The headline from Retraction Watch, a website that details retracted papers, read, "Journal retracts paper claiming that group of indigenous Americans were Black Africans. A journal has retracted a paper on the origins of a group of indigenous Americans after readers said the basis of the paper was long discredited." So good for them, right? Good for the Urban Review. And the official statement put out by Urban Review stated, "The editor-in-chief has retracted this article, Wiggin et al. 2020, following concerns raised by readers. After post-publication peer review," which, holy shit, what does that even mean? "It was found that the theory that Olmecs were Black Africans, on which the lesson plan is based, is not substantiated according to current Mesoamerican archaeology and genetic evidence. The authors have been offered to submit a revised manuscript updated with information based on current knowledge for further peer review." Author Greg Wiggins stated on behalf of all co-authors that they do not agree to this retraction. So good on the Urban Review, although this whole idea of post-publication peer review is pretty suspicious, right? That's pretty suspect because you're supposed to do the peer review before the article actually gets published. That way you know if you're going to be putting out bullshit or not. So this was back in 2020. And while I was preparing the talk that I was going to give, I was, going back and pulling up the information, looking stuff up online so I could get it all together for this talk. And I came across something that was disappointing, to say the least. And what I discovered was that despite having this paper retracted in such a public fashion, the authors of this paper reworked it as a chapter in a book that was published in 2023. So 3 years after this paper was retracted, they snuck it back through and got it published as a chapter in a book. I think it's chapter 5 of this book called Unbleaching the Curriculum: Enhancing Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Beyond in Schools and Society. So once again, deliberately, intentionally using misinformation, pseudo-archaeology, conspiracy nonsense to actively undermine ethnic studies and just spit in the face of Indigenous history, spit in the face of Indigenous people, saying that your history is wrong and we're going to teach it however we feel like it. So this was disappointing, although I can't say that I'm surprised, right? The publisher is Roman and Littlefield, and I wonder if the authors of this book bothered to inform the publishers that, hey, this manuscript includes information that was retracted by an academic journal after it was shown that it's based on bullshit, that the information we included in this chapter is absolute horseshit. But here you go. Here's the manuscript. We want it published anyway. So I wonder if they were that honest, or if they are truly just intellectually and morally bankrupt individuals, because this is one of the most dishonest, underhanded, scumbag things that I've seen in quite some time in the academic circles. And if they did tell Rowman and Littlefield, hey, look, here's this manuscript and it includes discredited information that we were forced to retract, and Rowman and Littlefield went along with it anyway, well, then fuck them. Fuck Rowman and Littlefield. If that was the case, something tells me that the authors neglected to inform their publishers that they had submitted a manuscript filled with nonsense. So here it is, Chapter 5, The Olmec, Ancient Civilizations in the Americas. And I've read the chapter, and it's basically they took the retracted paper and reworked it so that it works better as a chapter in a book rather than a standalone paper in a journal. They did not change any of the core content, right? The idea that the Olmecs are Black Africans, none of that has changed. It still goes off on, the Olmec, the oldest civilization in the Americas, was established by Black Africans, and how can we better teach this in social studies? So a little bit of a disappointment there. We felt like we had gained a victory, but unknown to us, just last year, they just said, fuck it. We're going to put out lies. We're going to put out disinformation, and we're going to put out utter bullshit anyway. So there you go. What a smack in the face. So sorry to leave you on such a down note, but I wanted to get this off my chest because I think it's really shitty that they were able to get this out here. And the fact that this book, the intent of this book is to be used as a textbook in universities. So the disinformation is going to get out there, and it just lets me know that the work we do here on the podcast is needed more than ever. And we just need to keep moving forward, onward and upward. And thank you, dear listeners, for the support that you've given us, because it really means a lot. And, when we see stuff like this, we're like, God damn, do people even care? But, all the messages we get, the feedback we receive, the comments we get, it's just an outpouring of support for the work that we do. And we really, really appreciate it. So thank you very much. Timo Itase.
Hey, Kurly. My name is Randy, man. Saludos desde Central California, man. Porterville, to be exact. I just wanted to just send you this quick voice message, man, and just give you your flowers, to you and your co-host. And I just wanted to say thank you guys for the work that you guys put in, and for the podcast that you guys created, because it is by far my favorite podcast. I listen to it every single day when I'm over here working at the dairy, and it's just so insightful and so careful at the same time, if that makes sense. I feel like you guys are very careful with and mindful with the things that you say and put out, and I just want to say I appreciate it and respect it. And yeah, man, much love desde California.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Aztlantis, a project of the Chimali Institute of Mesoamerican Arts. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do this by visiting talesfromaztlantis.com and clicking Support the Podcast. Your continued support will help keep the podcast ad-free and independent. Until next time, Timo Itase.